welcome to the March 2024 event of the DEI Leader Network. I'm Elizabeth Kerwin. I'm founder and managing director of Diversity Works, and it is my pleasure to share how an investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion helps organizations prepare for responding to external events, especially when they touch on difficult topics. This format for this event is a little different than what we've done in the past. We're streaming this recording live across LinkedIn and YouTube. We are here in the chat and encourage you to ask questions and share your own experiences related to responding to difficult topics. So please jump into the chat and introduce yourself. I'm coming to you from Northern Nevada, from Reno, and would love to hear where you all are coming in from and a little bit more about you. So Diversity Works is a certified women-owned small business which has developed proprietary tools for evaluating DEI plus performance in any workplace. Our assessments help inform actionable roadmaps for programming and implementation, as well as training curricula that educate, empower, and engage leaders and employees. We fundamentally believe that DEI is good for business because it drives productivity, innovation, and resilience. And if you're interested in what we do, please click the link to our brochure in the chat. We will tell you all about the products and services that we provide and give you a better overview into who we are and what we do. Diversity Works created the DEI Leader Network, which is a part of this webinar today, as a way to support the growing community of DEI professionals and allies who are working really hard to tap into the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know this is really hard work and that many practitioners experience burnout and isolation within their own organizations. The DLN is a place to connect with smart ideas, to share your wins and losses, and to network with your peers. If you haven't already joined our LinkedIn group, please consider becoming a member. And a link to our group is in the chat, and you can find it by searching for us on LinkedIn as well. So turning to today's topic, we'll be walking you through a process to respond to external events through a DEI lens. The type of events that organizations find themselves needing to respond to can include really terrible examples of violence or war, natural disasters, health and safety issues such as recalls or other problems like that, and tech and security breaches. These types of things happen to organizations whether they have planned for them or not, and they're just something that is in the reality that we have to deal with. Basically, any external crisis that impacts your internal or external stakeholders can create a need to respond. So what we're going to talk about today is just a process for responding to these things so that you can be prepared in advance and hopefully navigate it through a DEI lens with the least amount of pushback or reaction as possible. We see this responding to external events and crises as fitting into a number of boxes in our DEI plus diagnostic framework. First and foremost, the response will be driven by your organizational values and vision. So that is that first box under strategy there. Your response should also aim to respect and strengthen your internal culture and climate, as well as promote employee engagement. And then externally, your response will be part of your public image and can reinforce your commitments to your community and the way that you do business. So responding to external events really has a lot of different homes within our DEI diagnostic framework. We find that with most issues that we talk about, there is a crosswalk between the different boxes in our framework, but that's not that just shows you how important it is to the organization. So let's dive in. The first step in the face of any crisis is to understand the situation. You're much less likely to respond in a way that you'll regret later if you have an accurate understanding of the facts of the situation from more than one reliable source. And what we mean by a reliable source is not necessarily the one who's out first with the information. You also need to evaluate whether that source is directly involved in the situation, whether they are actually on the ground or if they're interpreting events from elsewhere, whether they have the relevant training to weigh in or comment on the situation. So some things really do need a level of expertise to understand, and whether they have a particular agenda in sharing the information. So you just want to be really aware of where the information is coming from so that you don't respond to something that's factually inaccurate or is promoting a particular agenda that might be shading the facts in a certain way. As the New York Times wrote in 2012, early reports of breaking news events are very likely to be inaccurate. So it's really worth waiting to make a statement until you are confident in the information. The main reason that you want to wait to respond is to avoid feeding the rumor mill. It is perfectly acceptable to tell your stakeholders, both those that are internal to the organization as well as those outside your organization, that you will comment on a situation once you have all the relevant information. You can also point people to an authoritative source to follow for updates. And you can say, we're following this authoritative source for updates on the situation, and you can as well. When Matthew Perry died last year unexpectedly, the internet erupted with conspiracy theories and false claims around his death, including suggestions that he died because of having had the COVID-19 vaccine. The media fact-checking organization Pointer felt compelled to weigh in on this story to help warn journalists from fanning the flames of this conspiracy, that there was absolutely no reason to link his death to the COVID-19 vaccine, and people who are making those statements are promoting an anti-vaccine agenda. So, there was a lot of information swirling around, and it became hard to discern what is good information or bad information. So from a crisis communications perspective, it is so much better to say that you are waiting on the relevant facts than having to issue a correction after the fact. That you don't want to have to say, we jumped in too early, we didn't realize that all the information wasn't in yet, or we commented on something that was not an authoritative source of information. So, just from a crisis comms perspective, you really do want to make sure that you're not becoming part of that rumor mill, and it's relatively easy to do. The next step in the process is to apply strategic filters for your organization to determine whether and how to respond. So as DEI practitioners, you will already have a very good sense of your organization stakeholders, both internal and external. And as you consider each group of stakeholders, you'll want to think about how they're impacted by the situation and why they care.
Elizabeth, this is Holly Wittenberg. What process would you recommend an organization follow here?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can do to really get a good handle on who your stakeholders are and why they care, but a comprehensive stakeholder mapping process is really the best way to have a full, broad view of who your stakeholders are and why they're going to care about certain situations.
It would strike me also that this is really an opportunity to show why DEI infrastructure is so important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, understanding your stakeholders is already a critical part of a DEI practitioner's purview. The fact that you really understand who all the different players are and what they're bringing to a certain situation in terms of, why they care, what their perspectives are, is really part of a DEI leader's purview. Now you might, and we're going to talk about this in the next couple of slides, but you might have groups within your organization that are already working very specifically on particular issues, such as an employee resource group or a business resource group, if you have those, or even affinity groups. If if the situation has something to do with women's health, and you've got a women's ERG or a women's affinity group, and you already have a natural place to really help you inform the response to the situation and to understand how people are feeling about the situation. So there's a lot that you can do in advance as a DEI practitioner to really understand who those different stakeholders are, even drilling down from employees broadly into groups of employees, because different types of employees are going to care about different things. People who have children in childcare are going to be different than people who have children in college. There's just a lot of different ways to slice and dice those internal audiences, but you want to do it with care and really understand why they're going to respond a certain way to a certain situation. So the next thing that you'll want to do in terms of applying those strategic filters to the crisis that you're responding to is really thinking through your business or your mission objective. If you're a nonprofit organization, then the mission is probably more important to you than if you're a for-profit organization. The business case is going to be more important. So you'll want to think through, does this situation impact your organization either directly or indirectly? And the more directly your stakeholders and your organization are impacted by the situation, the more critical your own response becomes. So the further away you can, probably justify it by saying we're not directly impacted. This isn't about us. But the more closer it comes to home, the more you are going to feel compelled to make a response.
Elizabeth, do you have an example that you can offer us to bring this to life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, things like this happen almost daily, which is a sad state of affairs. But we were talking to a company that is located in upstate New York, and they were particularly impacted by the Buffalo grocery store shooting a few years ago, where a gunman went into a predominantly Black neighborhood and into one of the only grocery stores serving that neighborhood, and committed an act of terror that was shocking to the community as well as to the broader country. But this company, because they work in that community and their customers are in that community, felt very strongly that they should be part of the response, that they should be part of the solution, that they should be seen as providing comfort to the community and alleviating the pain of the community. So, it can be, the crisis doesn't have to be related to your business model or your mission case, but when it directly affects the people who are part of your close stakeholder network, then it becomes more important to respond. So that brings us to the last strategic filter that you need to consider, and it's an important one. It's acknowledging your own personal bias. So I think there's a tendency to think of bias as having a very negative connotation, but it is in fact an evolutionary feature of the human brain. It allows us to navigate and survive in a dangerous world. It's just how we process information quickly and assess a threat. I mean, that's essentially what implicit bias is. And we can't eliminate all of our own personal bias altogether because it's just how our brains work. It's the way that we're wired. But what we can do is be aware of our biases and examine how they can be influencing our thought process. It's not the most comfortable thing to do, for sure. So, you can start in private. You don't need to share it with your whole team or anything like that. But you really do want to think through what biases you have that might be affecting how affecting your gut reaction to something that's happened in the world. So it's really worth taking a pause and asking yourself, why do I feel this way? What is it that is making me have this reaction versus a different reaction, and then who might be having a different reaction to this same situation and why. So it's always a good exercise to just take a step back and think about what am I bringing to this situation that's helping to color my response one way or another, and just acknowledging it. And then, you can acknowledge it and hopefully move on. I don't get, you don't have to do a deep examination, but you definitely need to be aware when your own personal biases are affecting your response or reaction to a certain situation. So the third step in the process is to really crowdsource your messaging and your actions. So as DEI practitioners, you all are in a great position to have a diverse group of volunteers ready to provide input and feedback. This could be your DEI committee. This could be your employee resource groups. It could be those workplace allies that you've recognized and you see are doing good work around DEI in the workplace. These are all great places to start soliciting that input. And once you have that group gathered, you'll want to facilitate a conversation using the same strategic filters from step 2. So again, how are the organization's stakeholders affected by the situation? Why do they care? How is the organization affected? And what personal biases may be influencing my reaction? So this is a group that you should be able to pull together relatively quickly because you already know who they are and how to communicate with them. And they can help advise you on how to respond. You want to make sure this group is as diverse as possible, that you've got a lot of different types of perspectives represented. And they're going to help you determine whether you need to make a proactive statement, whether the organization really needs to come out with something proactively for its stakeholders, or whether it just needs to do a holding statement so that something that's prepared in advance, but that you just hang on to until somebody asks you for it, or whether there's some sort of action that you need to take, such as making a donation to a relief organization or asking employees to volunteer their time and expertise.
Elizabeth, you've answered one of my questions about how to bring these different groups together quickly, but given your decades of comms experience and DEI experience, how best can a DEI practitioner work with a comms team? How do they get involved? Because the comms team is probably moving pretty quickly at this point. Just would like to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and thanks for dating me by mentioning my decades of experience. So you want to be, any good crisis plan is going to be tested in advance, right? You're going to have done the drills. You're going to have actually practiced pulling together people to write a response. You're going to know what approvals need to be made. This should all be very much planned, and the process should be identified well in advance of needing it. We all know that things come up that you're not quite ready for, but the more prepared you can be to pull together this group to help inform a response that you can then coordinate with the communications team, the better off you're going to be. So I would recommend actually working very proactively with the communications team to say, in case of a situation that impacts our stakeholders in any way, that touches on a topic that has to do with, DEI in some way. So whether it's, racial inequity or gender inequity or anything that kind of falls within that purview, you want to coordinate that response with the communications team. So I would set up a drill. I would say, okay, on next Tuesday, we're going to have a pretend crisis, and we're going to see how quickly we can get all of these groups together on a Zoom call to talk through this response. Or I want to see how quickly we can get people together in person. It depends on your workplace, whether you're a hybrid or in person or fully remote, how you pull people together, but you actually want to practice it. You actually want to try to get people together and then identify where there are holes, where things didn't work, why they didn't work so that you can fix them so you're prepared the next time around. There really is no amount of crisis planning that goes to waste. It's going to help you really identify where those vulnerabilities are, where you have problems pulling people together so that when the real crisis hits, you're ready. Run drills and practice, as the banner says. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Holly. So the next thing you're going to do, and this has to do with really kicking the tires on your blind spots, is to test the water with your response, and just to help make sure that you don't misstep. Once you know how you're going to respond and what you're going to say, share that draft with a diverse group of employees who weren't involved in crafting it. So you can send it out to folks that who are going to give you thoughtful responses. These are people maybe you have identified in advance, or you've got an email list ready to go. But you'll want to get some reactions, and you really want to be listening with open ears to their concerns or their feedback. If you get tough questions, you want to make sure that you're able to respond to them. So, I think that tough questions are great. They really help us, make sure that we're ready to put our best foot forward. So I would be especially attuned to any sort of criticism or hesitation or anything else that's giving people pause, and make sure that you can justify or respond to it.
It's really interesting, Elizabeth. I think about what we often refer to as the insidiousness of groupthink, and how if we just talk to people who think like we do, we might have a pretty serious blind spot. And so the tough questions, although I understand their value and certainly would imagine that having them come from an internal source and to test them before we go public is critical. But at what point do you just say, there's so many questions, maybe we shouldn't respond? Like, what's that threshold in your mind based on your experience?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And some of these things that we're talking about are really heated and passionate issues, right? Like if you think about where we are as a country, as Americans, in responding to the war in Gaza, there's a deep divide between the camps on that, and the charges being leveled against people who have different points of view are very serious. You've got presidents of colleges being pulled in front of Congress to answer charges of anti-Semitism on campus, and those are really serious situations, and ones that you would rather not get embroiled in if you can. I think that if you get to a point where it's really there's no way to please anybody, then you need to really rethink the strategy of issuing a response and a statement. Ideally, what you can find is some sort of common ground. You can kind of peel back the statement to a place where everybody does agree, and that can be your floor. And you really want to find that place where you can find some common ground. Again, that might take you to a point where you're not actually saying anything, and if you're issuing a statement that doesn't really say anything, then you need to think through whether it's really worth making that statement. Ideally, we are always saying something that adds some value to the conversation, advances the conversation, it is a productive use of our time. But if you can't go as far as you'd like in your statement because of valid internal criticism, that's okay. You need to be able to get to a point where you can actually make that statement or share that information so that without incurring that criticism. I will say that your internal audiences are going to be much kinder about their criticism usually than external audiences. So the people who know you and love you are probably going to be a little nicer about it. So you want to take that input into account, because it's much better to be having that controversy or that reaction internally where you can hopefully manage it a little better than once it becomes public and external, then you lose control of that message and and that communication. So not to say that there is, a perfect way to do this. I think that, you're going to have to be sensitive and iterative in the process, and hopefully land in a place where most voices, most people can be behind you, if that makes sense. All right, so step 4 is when you are ready to respond to the situation, when you've ironed out all those kinks and you've gotten all your folks internally on the same page, and most everyone is in agreement on what the message is and what you're going to say, it's really helpful to think about releasing that message or making that statement as starting a conversation with your stakeholders. So this communication should be two-way, and active listening is just as important as your message. And hopefully you have a regular working relationship with your communications team, which we just talked about. You should be very well coordinated with them. And they're going to help you deliver that message through existing employee and customer communication channels. So for employees, this might be email or instant messaging. It might be you're giving talking points to managers for their team meetings, or you might be holding a town hall to address it. However it is that you regularly communicate with your employees, that's how you want to distribute this information through those channels. And for customers, it's going to be a little bit different depending on the organization or, external stakeholders. So that could be your social media. That might be the place where most people come to see what you have to say as an organization. You might have email lists that you can send information out directly to those customers or other stakeholders. Or you might actually think about using your advertising spend to help deliver that message. So there's a lot of opportunities to share the information through your owned or your shared platforms. And you want to be thinking about all the different levers that you have to share the information so that you're doing it in a way that stakeholders feel like they're being brought into a conversation, that they're being respected enough to have that two-way conversation with you. And you want to be setting yourself up to listen for feedback to that statement as well. Just to drill down on the active listening here, you should be posting your response to your website and your blog, as well as shared platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And then you'll really want to take that step to actively monitor the reaction. That could be through social engagements. So, how many people are giving a like or a thumbs up or a heart or a share, those sorts of things. You'll want to be looking at the comments to the post, and what people are sending in outside of that. So what information you're getting into your common email box, etc. And then you want to make sure that you're both listening and responding to positive and negative comments. So people are really quick to pick up on attempts to ignore or downplay criticism. If you see that there's a lot of people saying a certain thing in the comments and the threads, and nobody's addressing those concerns, then you can tell that somebody is sidestepping that, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address that criticism. So if you think there are justified criticisms or concerns raised in this dialogue, you might even need to consider reevaluating your statement.
So Elizabeth, again, drawing on your comms experience, do you just at some point take down the statement if you've totally missed the mark?
I think that's a situation of last resort. I do think that taking down a statement says something that you may not want to say to your external stakeholders, which is we went off, without thinking this through, or something like that. I do think that, I always advocate for transparency. You want to actually, be very transparent in how you communicate with those external stakeholders. So if you revise the statement, I would say we have revised our statement and now, we're saying this. But I would leave the original up. It's just one of those things that, the internet remembers. There's always going to be somebody who took a screenshot and will remind everybody that this is the first thing that you said. And in many ways, that then becomes the thing that people remember. There's a guy I follow on social media who coined this term, the Streisand effect. And the Streisand effect is that by trying to get information pulled down, you're actually creating more visibility for the situation. So you don't want the act of pulling down a statement to then actually be the thing that people are commenting on. It's much easier to say we are reissuing this statement based on what we have heard from our stakeholders, which is really valid and important, and we want to reflect that. It's a much better message than throwing a statement in the trash and trying to pretend that it never existed. All right, so the last step here, one we call show and tell. It's really important to keep in mind that actions do speak louder than words in many situations. Ultimately, issuing a statement is a strategic decision, and sometimes it might be better to stay silent on a situation. There's no law that says you have to comment on everything. You need to make that decision as an organization using those strategic filters that we laid out in the beginning. And in some cases, a statement may come across as self-serving if it's issued in lieu of meaningful action. So you can't, use a statement as a get out of jail free card, right? It needs to have a strategic purpose, and it needs to advance the conversation. So sometimes it really is just better to stay silent on a certain situation, and that's going to depend on the situation and the organization. And hopefully it's not just because the lawyer said so, right? Like you actually have a good reason for not issuing a statement, because it might look like we're trying to, sell gasoline at high prices in a situation when people need it. There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to make a statement.
So, Elizabeth, a couple things strike me as we come to the end of your presentation, which is this is not a whimsical effort. This is a very big lift for an organization. Can you talk a little bit about the approval process and who you've seen in your experience be involved in making the final decisions, and how all that input is presented to those people to decide whether or not to proceed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And everything that you would do in a crisis communication setting is about process and identifying those processes in advance when you're not under pressure, when you're not being, in a time crunch or some other situation that's creating a lot of pain points, frankly. So, I would have in my communications plan, when we need to issue a statement to respond to an external event, this is going to be the decision tree and the approval tree, and these are all the different departments that are going to need to say okay to this situation. You might even be able to say in that process who can override if you get a no from one department or from one certain person, that we can override that no if we have these other ducks in a row. So, really you want to understand your own organization, where that kind of chain of command comes from, and who is on that process on the way up. And you'll want to have, literally a checklist so that you can say, yes, this was approved by this department on this date, and we were able to advance the ball. So, really the more processes you have in place, the less opportunities there are to make missteps. And, God forbid you forget to share the statement with your regulatory team. Maybe they're working on something on Capitol Hill, and this is going to put them in a political jeopardy for that objective. You want to make sure that all of those I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So the more processes you can put in place to really help guide you and make sure that you are, following your procedure, the better. So as we wrap up here, just to reiterate on the show and tell, sometimes in lieu of a statement, you can actually show what you're doing. And this is, actions being louder than words. So really think about, what are you doing to help employees who are directly affected by the crisis or other really close stakeholders? Do people in your community need help? What kind of help is needed? Is it the kind of help that can be solved with people, with volunteers, or does it need money, donations? And then in the long run, has this situation uncovered a problem that should be addressed by policy change? And if so, how can your organization be part of that solution, part of that effort to really change a policy so that we're not in this situation again in the future?
Elizabeth, would you actively engage the press? And if you decide to, how would you do that?
Yeah, that's another really strategic decision that you're going to have to make. And the calculus there is, am I sending this to my press list because I want, that reputational benefit? I want them to, to be thinking about me in a certain way, or am I sharing it with my press list because we really need this community to understand the problem and to help? So you have to make that calculus about whether it is a self-serving effort or whether it is really about that being part of the solution. So take for example the need for volunteers. As an organization in the community, you might only have so many employees who are available to volunteer. There might be a gap there. So helping a reporter understand this story and talk about the need for more volunteers is then going to get that message out to the community that they need to step up and help, and these are the ways that they can help. So there's very strategic reasons for using the the power of the press, your relationships that you've built up as an organization with your local media to help with the situation. You just want to avoid any outreach that just seems simply to be reputational in nature, and leave that for for your LinkedIn page or your social page to talk about what you're doing as a brand or as an organization. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to share a quick story about two organizations that we know as at Diversity Works and their respective responses to the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas and Israel's subsequent response in Gaza. It happened a number of months ago. We're obviously still very much embroiled in that conflict. It's still part of the news every single day. The humanitarian toll that it's taking is increasingly, apparent and concerning to a lot of people. And I would say that the American public's perspectives on this situation have been evolving and changing. And this crisis has really led to more reflection and more movement that we've seen in a long time in terms of support for Israel. And the first organization has been very intentional about weaving DEI into their own DNA. They're embracing it as a way to build their culture and to inform their work. And when the attack and counterattack happened, they felt like they needed to respond. They felt like internal stakeholders were expecting the leadership to signal some sort of response to this attack that happened half a world away. And then what the leadership team decided to do was follow a process similar to what I laid out in this presentation. And they came to the conclusion that the best way to engage their stakeholders, which were primarily their internal employees, was through a listening circle with their staff. So they wanted to conduct a listening circle to really help facilitate a conversation with those most important internal stakeholders. So they set up a facilitated conversation with ground rules. Everybody was encouraged to share their perspectives. And while not everyone had the same point of view, which they fully expected to happen, everyone felt heard. And the organization turned a difficult situation into an opportunity to improve employee engagement at the end of the day. So, it's okay that not everybody ends up in the same place. The fact that everybody was able to talk, to share their perspectives, to feel listened to and heard is just fundamental to employee engagement. Another organization that we know, the CEO sent an all-staff email just in the immediate wake of the attack, expressing his personal beliefs about the attack, and without any consultation with his team or with his DEI committee. And almost immediately, he faced a backlash to this email. A lot of people in the organization did not share his perspective, and they felt offended by his message. And as a result, a significant amount of time and effort has now been focused on managing the fallout of this email, and it's distracting the organizations from other priorities. So when you have your leaders constantly in meetings talking about how we're going to undo the damage or repair the damage from this email, they're not focused on other things such as how do we improve customer service or how do we improve employee engagement. So it's a distraction at the end of the day. So we hope that you all have learned a lot from this presentation. We have created a guide to holding a listening circle like the one that I just talked about, and we're going to share that with you all. It's a really, as Holly has mentioned before, it helps you with the process. It identifies a process for laying out how to respond to these things in a timely manner and an effective manner so that you can really keep your stakeholders engaged and hopefully come out of these crises as a stronger organization and a more resilient organization. So thanks again for your participation in today's event. I hope that the chat has been lively and that you've had all your questions answered in the chat. But if not, please, again, feel free to email me directly, elizabeth@diversity-works.net, and I would be very happy to answer any questions that weren't answered in this presentation today, or any other communications questions that you have. As Holly mentioned, I do have some background and experience in that area. So thanks again for your participation. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in our LinkedIn group. And please do reach out if you have any other questions about DEI. We really do love talking about it. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks again.
Thank you.